Hey everyone, welcome to All the Talk Show, where we strive to educate, entertain, and empower. I'm your co-host Olivia.
I'm Callie.
So welcome. Thank you for joining. Today's topic is quite interesting. Callie and I came on sometime this week to kind of talk about how we want to structure this I guess you can call it series now, right? Because we are no longer doing just one episode on patriarchy, but we're going to do multiple, specifically diving into different topics that are, or different things in our culture that the patriarchy is really embedded in. And so we're excited for this conversation. But before we get started, Callie and we usually do an act of kindness. And so this week, we really want to focus in on just the one act of kindness that we've seen that has happened over this past week was the Hmong homeless man in LA. And I must say, the one thing that I love about our Hmong people is how quickly we come together when things are in shambles for one person or one family, right? Just seeing the amount of people who are wanting to help. The couple of gentlemen who drove around downtown LA for maybe half a day to a day. There was another Hmong sister who drove around first for like half a day just looking for this gentleman. I think it's just amazing. And I think that happened within like a day of that post going viral for the Hmong community. So, I think regardless of what people are going through, I think it's amazing that we always pull through. And so, I'm really happy and excited that some of the Hmong brothers down there in LA really made it impactful for the brother who really needed it. Anything you want to add, Chloe?
No, just I love the sharing in social media and how far that is able to reach. And I mean, you and I both use social media a lot, and we really appreciate the goodness that can come from it. Because I know there's a lot of downsides that can happen as well. But through social media, I felt like that story was able to be spread, and that he was able to, hopefully, I don't know if you've seen the resolution, if he's been reunited with family, but I'm hopeful that through social media he can be connected. So
yeah, I think I'm following this story. I think the last thing I heard was that they were trying to connect with his family. I haven't heard any update other than that. So I hope that they do connect him to his family, and I hope that he is ready for change and ready to come back home and things like that. So I'm really grateful for everyone who just is really wanting to help and leaving out all of the noise that's happening and all the negative comments, but more so just focusing on the fact that, he's safe and we're trying to get him home. So
yeah, it's definitely a great display of what community looks like in our Hmong community. I think that sometimes we tend to focus on the things that divide us, and it's great to see that we're all coming together and like really living what our Hmong culture really represents. So
right, community and family for sure.
Okay. All right. So we, as Olivia alluded to, when we first started this, it was going to be one episode. It was going to be a kind of like one hit wonder and then be done with it. And as we talked to more people and, really educated ourselves on what that really means, we realized that this needed to be a continuing discussion. And so this is just the first of many, many episodes that we're going to be having on this conversation. And so we invited two individuals today to talk with us. And this first episode really is that laying out foundation for us and really figuring out why patriarchy kind of formed in the first place within our culture. And of course, I think a lot of the comments that we've gotten is that there's other patriarchy and like I would say that every culture is either patriarchy or matriarchy, right? And so we recognize that we are not the only one, but I think it is helpful to kind of really go back in time and really look back into our history and just all kind of agree that this is how our history was, and that's what kind of formed and shaped our Hmong culture and what that looks like now. And so we have the first person is an author, and I actually have his book. I think it's in the house somewhere, so I don't have it with me. But I've been enjoying reading about it, and was the book itself was like a real foundation for Olivia and I preparing this this episode. And so he is a teacher from California. He teaches science, and I think is really trying to work on a lot of the traditions and writing them down, which I think is so important, because if you don't have that in your family, I feel like that's a little bit harder to learn and to find people that will teach you. And so I really appreciate that, especially somebody who, you know, like was born and was a teenager when he came here. I feel like that is a really special generation for our Hmong people, because they understand what it was like back then and was old enough to be cognizant and recognize the you know, special traditions and whatnot, but they are also here and, like, you know, educated, and it is really bridging that gap for a lot of our generation that's losing the culture. And so that is Bocha. And then our second person is Seng Alex Vang, and I think a lot of us will probably know who he is, because he is the founder of Hmong American Experience, and is always sharing a lot of great news and information. And I think that's where I first heard the story about the homeless man. And so he's also a professor, lecturer in California, and so we have all, like, Pacific Standard Time people this time, which is really, really great. But yeah, without further ado, let's bring them on the show with us.
Hi. Hello.
Okay. Hello, everyone.
How are you guys doing?
We're doing good. Good. It's beautiful Saturday afternoon here in Sacramento, and it's nice to be inside though, with two beautiful women and very great guy saying, and so I'm looking forward to a great chat.
Yeah, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it's this is such a great conversation, and I think it's just nice to have these kind of conversations, and we really hope that as we have the conversation today, that we will see this happening between men and women, you know, across the U.S. I feel like sometimes we tend to have these conversations in pockets within, you know, like men or women, but I think where it really matters is to have these conversations together. And so anything else to add before we just run straight into it?
Well, you know, a lot of what I write and what I do is from the first person narrative and personal opinion, as well as what I know, what I have learned over the years. And it's a lot more based on wisdom, more so than research and theories and applications of, you know, theoretical ideas. And so take it with a grain of salt. Don't take everything as, you know, I mentioned here as, you know, has to be backed by data and theoretical, you know, values or things that we have to kind of look at it critically. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I certainly feel like if you go to church, those, you know, like our cultures and traditions are a little bit different. And then if you are still practicing shamanism, that looks a little bit different. If you know, second generation looks a little bit different. So you're absolutely right. But we do appreciate, you know, the time and effort that you have put into writing your book and really spreading that. So
yeah,
I think initially we really just want to get into what the Hmong culture is to you both.
So and I just want to add to Kelly before we have them answer that question, is that a lot of us are Hmong American, and so our experiences are going to be a little bit different from those who still live in Thailand or Laos. And so just know that the experiences that we share or statements that we made are just literally pertaining to, you know, people who live here in the U.S. It may be a little bit different for people who live elsewhere. So just kind of keep that in mind. So, yeah, if Yepar is saying, I think our very first question to you, and maybe Kelly and I can chime in as well, but define what is Hmong culture to you?
Okay, Seng, you want to go first?
I think you probably know much more than me. So maybe go first, and because I think what I know is about a lot of the changes, right? And so I focus on these kind of changes and how we're becoming American and things like that. So maybe you know more of the history than I do.
It's okay. Thank you, though. We all know the same. I mean, you're more academic and I'm more traditional. So, we're looking from different angles, and the girls also see it from the woman's perspective. And I think we complement each other very well in this setting and this chat. But to me, the Hmong culture is, or like any culture, we do have the customs and costumes and traditions and arts and language and religions that all fuse together to form the identity that we have. And we are very unique in the fact that all of these things we can dig deep, and we're very unique. And that's one of the great things about Hmong people is if you look deep enough, our culture, language, and everything that makes us Hmong is quite unique. And once you find the truth about it and the meaning behind all of these things, it's a fascinating thing, because when you grow up as young people grow up, they don't learn about these things at home, but when they grow up and they dig deep, they actually find the meaning in a lot of what the values in our culture. It makes us, proud people.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I think kind of like my statement that I said before, like Hmong culture to me is very different from someone who maybe is a Christian, because I think like the way we were brought up or how we grew up and what we're taught, it's a little bit different for each individual. So I think for me, Hmong culture really means like family and community, clans, shamanism, choking, kukong, things like that. Because my dad was all of those. Where my real dad was all of that. And then when my mom married my stepdad, it was a continuation of all of that. So that's kind of what I grew up on. So Hmong culture to me means all of that and so much more that I don't understand. And I think that's why Callie and I are so interested in, when you talk about patriarchy, it's not just about the bad things or the good things, but it's really understanding the Hmong culture and how it's all embedded in, and how do we talk about that in a more, I guess, professional manner, instead of this argumentative of like it's bad or good.
Yeah, I'm definitely glad you brought up community. That's, like when I think about growing up as a little girl, we lived really close to like a lot of family. So that's what I know as like Hmong culture. Every weekend there was, or no, and sometimes it got old, right? Because it was like every weekend it was either at our house or at someone's house. But now as I'm an adult, I'm recognizing how important that was, and even the Hmong culture in general, like it's very community driven, right? Like everything that we do, we are relying on a community. But I think that's the beauty of it, is that we do have each other, and that, just like we were talking earlier with the homeless person, right? Like one person needs help, and there's a community that is there to come together, and so I would say when I think about Hmong culture, I think about, just as Olivia said, community. Same.
Yeah, so I think I'll add that, like there's because Hmong, we live in so many different places, so many different countries, right? And there's bigger groups that have for a long time tried to make us become like them, right? And over like thousands of years, but yet we're still Hmong, because when you see someone that's Hmong, right, you automatically know that you're Hmong, even though you may be Hmong American, they may be Hmong Chinese, but there's something unique about you that makes you Hmong, and you know that that person is Hmong too, right? And so you think about all these things that our culture has gone through, and we still survive, right? As a minority group, as a group that went through war, conflict, leaving China, going to Southeast Asia, like all these things, like there's something that makes us, our culture has survived, despite all these bigger groups trying to assimilate us, trying to make us become like them. That hasn't worked. So we're still Hmong, and even in America, right? Like a lot of youth are assimilating, they're becoming more American and Hmong, right? But I think that there's still something about them that makes them Hmong too.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I was like my ex and I, we were Mormon, and I would say that when you're Hmong and Mormon, it's very competitive in terms of, because I would say Mormonism is a pretty strong religion, but being Hmong is very strong as well. And so there's a lot of like competing things. But I would never say that like I'm Mormon, not Hmong, even though like some of our audience members are saying religion plays a big part in it. And for me, it was always like right there beside each other. So thanks for bringing up that point.
I think
right.
oh, go ahead, Callie.
No, I was just going to move it on.
Yep.
But you have another point?
Nope, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks for helping us define that. And one word to the audience is, to really think about what that means to you as well, because, we come from different lens and different experiences. And so what Hmong culture means to me is going to be different from what it means to you. And so I would encourage our audience to kind of really think about that as we continue on this conversation. And so can we spend the next 15 to 20 minutes on just the Hmong history? And so really looking at how that originated in China, and then, going down to Laos and Thailand, and then, what that kind of looks like. So I know, Yapal, in your book, I, read a nice little chunk of that, but maybe you can start us with that and help us to really understand how life was like.
Thank you. I think one of the things that, as educated people, as well as young people, we tend to want to know how things got started, how we originated, and those are questions that, as small people, we grow up, we're not supposed to be asking questions. We're supposed to be listening and participating and just do what we were told. And a lot of times when we ask, how did we become patriarchal in society, a patriarchal society? And I think there's really no clear answers out there. But if you trace the history of Hmong people back into the ancient days, Hmong people had gone through periods of very, very violent past. And in any culture, any civilized culture that has war and violence in their society, they have to have protectors. They have to have defenders. And of course, the men were more or less the defenders. If you're going back to his history, there's some women that were taking part in the fighting against the Chinese, against oppression. But the vast majority of the people, the heroes of the past, like Jia Xiaomei, Ji Ye, to Wu Baiyi, all of those are men who had not only the mentality but also the physical strength or the physical prowess to defend. And I think it's among patriarchal societies stem from that.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at what happened in the agrarian lifestyle, especially in southern China into Southeast Asia, where we have to chop down forests that were filled with, predators like tigers and what have you, then we need to have these men chopping down the big trees and making sure that the family is safe, also against a lot of foreign invaders and oppressions. And so I think it stemmed from the necessity to have, man being the protector and woman being the ones that takes care of the kids and takes care of the food and cook and clean and stay home with the kids to make sure the kids are safe, and the men are out there doing the heavy lifting. And I think that's part of it. But I think one of the most convincing things about how Hmong culture developed this hierarchy of men being at the helms was through, pretty much under, 比较 OG, 比较 hormone, especially in Laos during the secret war, during the Vietnam War, where men were empowered into these high-ranking officers in the army, in the military, and they came back with the gun strapped on the shoulder and in uniform, and we were supposed to call them the law, and we had to honor them like they were royalty. And I think that also empowered the men to also do pretty much whatever they want when they came back into the community, into the family. And I think that it developed over time to the point where we are right now, due to the fact that we had to face some very, very violent past in the life that we had to endure and live, required that, men be the protector, defenders, and women be the submissive ones. And I think it may not be like that at the beginning, but it may also be even worse at the beginning. Nobody knows because nobody was there to witness it. But to my opinion, in my opinion and my analysis, I think it evolved in that fashion.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question on that, because I think like now, when I talk to people about this, right, there is this maybe this valuing of like men's role over women's role. So I'm curious in like all your, like just your experiences, your studying, your research, do you think that historically men has seen women's roles as lesser? Because like, in terms of power, right, like men biologically are stronger, they're able to do the physically harder jobs, but I think as women we still are the bearer of children. We still have to cook, we still have to make a home for a family. And so I'm curious to see if you have felt like that has kind of always been the case.
I'm not sure if that has always been the case, and I think we may have to dig deeper, because in certain societies, certain Hmong communities, certain Hmong villages in different parts of China have slightly different ways of structuring their hierarchical, hierarchy in terms of stature and dominance in the family and community. As I have just learned that in southern China, in the area where between Guangxi and Hunan, there was a Hmong community there, or in that region. Women actually are the ones that are calling the shots. They're the ones that are, at the helm in pretty much everything they do, and it developed in that fashion because of the political influence, as well as the war that happened and all that stuff. So it may not necessarily been that way, the way we have been all along. It may have been different, but that requires some of us to really go dig deeper and do more research. And at this point, a lot of it is speculation, but what I'm talking about is just more of speculation rather than based on data and research. So yeah, more work needs to be done, and perhaps we will find that answer somewhere.
Okay. And then I have a second question. So, during the Vietnam War, there was I would say that we had a lot of boys, young men, older men, like probably like our strongest group of men probably die from the war, right? And so I'm curious to see if, and like this is open for Seng as well, and Olivia as well. And so I'm curious to see if we saw like a rise in matriarchy, because if someone's husband passes away, the woman is the one that's left to kind of fend for their family. And so I'm curious to see if you in your research and experiences have seen that risen up.
In my opinion, and this is purely my opinion, I think it's quite the contrary. And the reason is, in a period where war had taken a lot of the men, women now became more or less desperate to find a father figure for her family or for kids. And men end up marrying 2 or 3 wives. Because remember, even during the secret war, the majority of the people still live in agrarian lifestyle. Only a fraction of the population were actually became urbanized in Nhật, and those are different. But the majority of the Hmong people still live up in the mountains, what they know, and they're still at the mercy of the violence that had taken place, the fighting, all that continued. Even though if you live on a mountain, and all that farming still continues, and a father figure, a man that will serve as the protector, defender of the family, and be your coach and teach kids to become, young, good, healthy, and productive members of society. Still need a father figure. And if you're a woman with a couple of kids, you can't survive in the Hmong world in the agrarian lifestyle. You have to be subordinate to somebody. So I think it might be the contrary in other societies, a little bit more civilized societies. When the man falls, the wife takes him home, like the royal family in the United Kingdom, for example. But in the Hmong world, it's not like that. When the man falls, the brothers pick up the tab and the task. And if the woman wants to make sure that her kid's okay, she either married the younger brother or venture out and have to marry another man. And so a lot of times when the fewer men than widows out there, of course you have to marry another man and so become a second wife and actually work contrary to what we would think. And actually it didn't do so well for the woman. And I think that's part of the contribution to where men have at the peak, or should we say at the turn of the war, it favored the man more, and it actually was pretty bad for the woman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. From what I read and things like that, like during the war, because so many men were killed, right? And it led to, I think, like polygamy, marrying more than men being able to marry more than one wife or two wives, right? The multiple wives, because our community was going through this conflict. And so I think from what I read about some of the oral histories about that, and I think that definitely during the Secret War, like this issue, you could look at it in a way that it was exploited in a way where women depended on men, they needed husbands, right? And so if you look before the war, polygamy was only for the people that have money, like the wealthy families who could afford to marry, like maybe second and third wife, right? In our culture, and so I think during the war, because so many men were killed, and there's I think so many widows, in some ways, like this issue was exploited, and then even in the refugee camp too, you hear stories about they need to marry someone to have status to be recognized in the community, right? And so it's not fair, right? But then that's what the conflict during the war caused to happen. Um, and so I think that polygamy really increased during the war into the refugee camps, and once they come to the United States, then it happens less, right? It's not as often anymore. But you look at during the 60s, 70s, I think that polygamy becomes a major issue in among cultures because of the war.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think maybe I'm talking more loud than really, having a question. But I guess like the way that our culture is set up is more favoring men, because I mean, I guess the question then is like, you actually don't have to marry someone to help them, right? But in terms of the way that our culture is set up, it's like you don't help them until you actually marry them and they become part of your family and become quote unquote assets to your family, right? Your children become assets to your family and you build up your family. And so I guess I feel like that's a little bit of a defect in how that was done during the war.
Well, and I think, Callie, you have to think back to like back then, like a lot of the heavy lifting was like so it's like if you allow your husband to go help someone who's in divorce, right, you're always afraid for your marriage too. So there's always that aspect to it as well.
That's true, but just because you're doing someone's thing doesn't mean you're doing them.
You never know, but I think that's why,
Exactly. You can't trust a man to be helping a woman for 5 seconds, knowing that, hey, there's nothing there, right?
And yet we're keeping them power, right? Sorry, that was a low jab. Yeah. Any other thoughts before we move on? There's definitely a lot of points, and like Yeah, well, even as you're talking about it, there's just different things that, it's coming up in my mind, because I know, like, my mom's mom, she didn't remarry, so she had, I feel like she had like 9 or 10 kids, and so when she came here, and her husband passed away, back in the old country, and she didn't remarry, and so she's since passed, but I think it's stories like that that, it definitely needs a lot of research, and how the women did fend, and I would say that my grandma was like the matriarch in the family, because it was really just her raising her kids, after my grandpa passed away. And I feel like I've heard other stories similar to that, where they were able to take care of their families, and not remarry. So yeah.
And that's a good point. That's a very good point that I should mention as well. In the fact that, we're a patrilineal society where all um, the boys inherit the traditions, the culture, the name from the father. But you're right. In situations where a mother, becomes a prominent member of the family, although all that cultural stuff is performed by the boys, she is the one that will be the one that uh, keep them together. The one that is the one with the sanity to keep the family together and help them make the right decisions. And that's partly because we as a society in the days, we revere wisdom. Um, we respect our elders. And if you're the mother and your grown sons who are very, very capable, but if they they're not going in the right direction, you can go in there and tell them, hey, this is not right. And that's what my grandma has been too, as well. And so, yeah, you're right in certain situations, but it's not as a society though. It's a family kind of thing, and it's also a very very there's a very small sector of society that go in that direction.
hmm and so after the war, then, we all came, or a majority of us came into the U.S. And so talking about, that assimilation, how that looked like, so including first generation and second generation, here in the U.S. How do you think that the Hmong people have assimilated into the American culture?
For my family, when we first came, these were the directives. We're told that we need to go to church. We're told that we cannot go outside without having shoes on and wearing nice clothes. We were told that once you get out of the car, go inside, don't hang out on the streets. This is the way American society works. And we tried hard. At the very beginning, we tried hard in the late 70s into the early 1980s. More people have tried hard to assimilate. Um, and we were also spread all across America. We're not like how we are today. In those days, in those early days, we tried hard to assimilate, even the elders, even the men, and it hits the guys really very hard, to which some of them, the men committed suicide. And to watch, just to give you an example, to watch Hmong leaders, elders, people like my father, people like military leaders that Hmong people had used to have, go from somebody who was on top of the food chain in their community and society now into a working class person that has equal rights and equal opportunities like the wife. It's almost like you're watching. Do you ever watch those cowboy shows where they round up a lot of stallions and put them and try to tame them and try to train them for riding?
Mhm.
That's what I've witnessed as we come to America. And some of the men couldn't handle it. They either commit suicide or fell into depression and perish as a result. And that's how Hmong people adapt and assimilated. Now, as time went on, I think that changed quite a bit, especially the younger generation. We learned to appreciate the opportunities and try to live with uh, the the laws and the boundaries that we have to abide and that have to live within. And I think we did quite well for the younger generation, as well as the American born Hmong kids. But for the elders, some of them are still yearning to go back to their old life. And I think some of you may have seen that in your parents, your dad as well. The women, on the other hand, were totally digging it. I mean, many of them learned to handle money for the first time. Many of them actually learned to escape the situations without having to think about the repercussions. And I think that in that process, it created a lot of chaos in our community, and also um, create a lot of tragedies that and traumatize young people. And nowadays, as you young people grow up, you don't you don't see that what my generation witnessed, but you see the plight of the young people as well as the women on how to rebel against that. But you have to understand that for Hmong people, it was never really a slow transition like how America developed and transitioned from a um, patriarchal society into a more equal opportunity and have more equitable society. And it took America a good 200 years, maybe even closer to 250 years to get to where we are. For Hmong people, it's almost like you taking them from the ancient life, like in the 1970 and the 1700s, and bring them right into the modern time. And it's so swift, so fast that we don't know what hit us. And I think we have done very well in that respect.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think. Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
Yeah, I think just what I was saying that for those that came in the 70s, 80s, like life was really hard because they didn't speak the language, they didn't know the culture, right? And so a lot of our parents they went through like a culture shock. So they fled through like really traumatic war experiences, and then coming to a new country like this, they have to start all like the life all over again. And like what he mentioned that many of the leaders and like many of the military leaders, the men, they were the leaders back in Laos and Thailand, right? But then when they come to the United States, now the children can speak for them, right? That the children become like the parents. The women have more opportunities to work and to provide for family too in the United States. And so this, fighting for some of the men, right? It was very difficult to adjust to, and it was so fast, right? And if you look at a lot of the writings about journalists writing about Hmong in the 1980s, they wrote that that we were never assimilated. They wrote that we were the most unprepared group to ever come to America, right? But if you look at all the things that we have accomplished in the last 40 years, right? I think that based on what they assessed and based on what they were how they were writing about us, it's completely different. We have become Americanized, right? Third generation, and so yeah, I think that definitely going through that transition, it took a lot of time, and going through that, I think that all our families had a lot of trauma as well, and in our our generation today has to really try to bridge those gaps in terms of the elders and then the youth.
Yeah, that's a great point, like of the trauma, and I think I totally like had the visual when Yapa when you talked about basically transplanting people that were like lived in huts and stuff, and then moved them to this country that had a lot more privileges than we had back then. So question on, so you had mentioned about men committing suicide, and I'm not very familiar with this part our Hmong history. So are you able to elaborate on that a little bit more, on like the reasoning behind that? Because I think when I was listening to you, you kind of talked about men having to be equals like their wives, and then you kind of jumped into the men committing suicide. And so then I'm kind of painting this picture in my head of men feeling like they have to be equals like their wife, which kind of made them uneasy. So maybe you can elaborate on it and just help me to understand a little bit more on those suicides that happen in our community with the men.
I don't know if you could, attribute that to the patriarchal society that we live in, but it definitely has something to do with men being more privileged and also having more authority over um, the family, you know. And let me give you a couple of examples of, at the time though, and also in more recent years as well. There, one of the things about Hmong people is when you married a woman, she's yours. And some men in the days, as we were joking earlier, that if your wife goes hang out with some other wife, you could have the right to tell her, do not hang out with that woman, and she would follow suit and I mean and honor your wish. And so when you're in America, it's almost like you cannot say that. You cannot control your wife. You cannot have, put restrictions on your kids or your wife. And many men felt helpless. Let me give you an example of a cousin who first came to America, and the first thing that happened was the sponsor was in a average, mainstream American family, and so back then they were very compassionate people, and so and he was a pastor too of their church, and so he hugged the wife, every time he met, the pastor would give a little kiss on the forehead, and when they depart, always give that embrace and hugging, and he interpreted that as sexual contact, and he couldn't handle it because he couldn't do anything, and they were isolated away from everybody else. And so the bestest thing, the best option for him is to just stop all of that for himself, and he locked himself in the bathroom and used a Hmong knife to
Oh my gosh.
on himself twice in the chest. Well, fortunately, he didn't die. I mean, and the sponsor came the next morning. He was still alive and took him to the hospital. And that's just a anecdotal example, but I think it occurred to a lot of men for that insecurity, for that feel of worthlessness, and the women don't really need them anymore, and it happened. And so in latter years, in more recent years or decades, I should say, there have been a lot of conflicts where the man and woman, and the wife and husband go into these struggles, and the murder suicides and all of that stuff. And so I think it may be a trend or maybe some isolated incidents, but I strongly believe it's the fact that Hmong people had lived through a period where the men had greater control over their own selves and their family, and now they have to reverse that role where women don't really need them anymore. At the same time, women do want to have a more saying into the relationship, and so a lot of guys can't handle it. They just have to take this easy way out.
Yeah, so I mean, I think not just the suicide, but we know that, like, 1981 through 1983, around that time, right? We know that 117 Hmong men died when they went to sleep, right? And it's a world famous case. And then Dr. Ledu wrote about that issue, right? Like trying to figure out why did these 117 Hmong men die when they went to sleep, and most of them were healthy, right? And so some of it is like mental stress, going through these changes that are coming to the United States. And that was another issue as well too during that time. Just going through this transition, and they're trying to find out why all these men were dying in the 1980s. And so that's like just adding on to like not just the suicides, right? But then men who would just go to sleep, they were healthy, they didn't have any health problems, right? And then they will never wake up again, right? And so during that time, like that 3 to 4 year period, there was 117 Hmong men that died when they went to sleep.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that you should say that. There is a question posed by my Vadli, and we pinned it on here, but it says, but what about PTSD as related back to Yepal's comment about men fighting in war? So this was a conversation that we had earlier, and I feel like this is something that we don't talk enough about as well. I personally have not experienced in regards to like like my stepdad or my uncles, they have it, but they don't really talk about it. Have you guys, either of you, experienced talking to men with PTSD about the war?
I have on occasions, but the idea of PTSD is as you mentioned, the guys, Hmong men are very proud people, and they don't want to talk about the emotions and the traumas. And I think that's part of the struggle. I think the bigger struggle is the fact that Hmong people were brought to America as refugees. They were not, to the public and to the government and all of that, we're refugees. They were not in any way recognized as, military people or servicemen. And whatever they face was, remember, this is a secret war. And the doctors, the public don't really know about that. And of course they were traumatized by whatever they have to endure during the war. And after the war, they have to escape with their life. And, all of that, it would have definitely been some to look at if we, hindsight says, yes, we should have seek, professional help, and SD is definitely a factor. But back then, we didn't know about that. Remember when we first came to America for the first uh, 10, 15 years, Hmong people didn't speak the language. We didn't know how to get help. Even going to the hospital was a huge challenge. And not only because of those psychological, the mental health, but even the physiological help. You take a kid to the doctor, he has an issue, and a lot of times the parents have to contemplate between, oh, should I get Western medicine or go home and what could go on? And so the struggle was real. For one thing, it was a distrust of the American professional help, as well as a history of distrust of government, and then we have gone through this trauma and nobody recognizes it.
Yeah, thank you for answering that.
Yeah, and so I'm going to go back to Paul. I think a while ago you had mentioned that the elders and the men struggled with it. The women themselves really kind of embraced it because it allowed them more rights and more flexibility and a little bit open-minded about just them having responsibilities. And I think I think all humans feel that need to feel like they can have a right and a say in how they live their lives. And so I definitely don't I mean, I came here when I was 5, and so I would say I'm raised with very westernized viewpoints and embracing of what we're able to have, but never, I would say, like, never disregarding like what the opposite sex is able to do. But I mean, I definitely think that with how we and from my understanding of how we came here, that initially, like the initial group did get very limited education on what life was like here, right? Like the bathrooms, like glass, like things like that. And so I think once maybe the initial groups were came here and struggled, and then when I've talked to other people, they've said before they came to the U.S. they were able to have a lot of just kind of like classes on like money and going to the grocery store and stuff that now we take very for granted, right? But then I remember like when I first came here and like seeing like the glass, right, the glass from the inside to the outside, and feeling like that was like incredibly just really strange, right? Because I never experienced something like that, or like going from like my bed to like an American bed, and seeing like wow, like how high that was. And so I definitely feel like the assimilation has like I would say slowly taken place, and I feel like our first generation and second generation now like never really, I would say, gotten the education of why we do certain things the way that we do. And so then we've just kind of been pushed to go into school and really learn to kind of live, like live more like in the US, and being focused on education. And so I feel like because of that non-education from our parents of why things are done the way they are, right? Because like you have alluded to before, we are supposed to listen, right? But then our parents don't necessarily educate us and say, like we are doing this because XYZ. It's really like not the you, right? As little kids, not the you, and so that's kind of how I kind of view like like my assimilation is that I've grasped onto a lot of the Western ways because growing up I didn't necessarily always understand the reasonings of why. Olivia, your viewpoints on that?
What's that?
Just like how you feel like we've assimilated into, especially with, I would consider us like probably first generation. So how you feel like we've assimilated into.
I think it's very similar to your story for me, because when we got here, my dad got really sick and passed. And so a lot of it was going back to like what Yepa was sharing before, like she was on her own for a while, and then she married my stepdad now, who is a younger cousin to my brother. And it goes back to that power of like, even though your husband may pass, like you still need a man figure in your life, and especially in the Hmong culture. So for me, it was a lot of just like education and going to school, right? My mom didn't know any better. So it was always like, make sure you go to school. You can't be late for school. You have to go to school. And if I wasn't at school, then it's like, then you have to go to the farm with me to move what they and stuff. So I didn't really understand like the American culture, I guess, outside of education until I started working. I started meeting new friends, and really understanding how important education was. So I was extremely happy that at least at that point in time, my mom pushed me towards the education piece, because I was the only child who would actually go to school. So, I think for me, it really was the education that has helped me tremendously assimilate myself into the American Western culture for sure. The next question that I do want to ask the both of you, considering you guys both are educators and you probably speak with people who are second generation born or raised here, how do you think that they see or view patriarchy, or how do you think that it has changed from back then to now?
Are we going to carry on a little bit longer, or are we stopping at the?
No, we can carry on a little bit longer.
Well, Seng, you want to go first?
Like how the second generation see like patriarchy?
Yeah, how is patriarchy to them now than what it was for the generation from like Laos and Thailand?
Yeah, I think that for like the second generation, like they don't. I think they never really been taught or explained, like how we talked about earlier that how our parents learn. They learn by seeing, they learn by example, and they don't explain things like how we learn in America, how we go to school, how we learn in the classroom, right? And so I think that from my experience with young teaching young people, like a lot of these things that that they don't understand. Like so for example, like patriarchy, they don't understand that. Not a lot of people have explained to them, like how this is why this is a part of our culture, right? Why do we have these things in our culture? And so I think that that's one of the things that to start the conversation is for them to be able to talk to their parents, right? And then into communicating. And so I think that a lot of the second generation, like they don't understand, they don't know because no one has explained to them why these things are, right? Um, and then because they are, Americanized, they go to school, they they go to college, right? And then it's they learn, I think, differently, and how they see it as, I think sometimes when you see things written about in the newspaper, it seems like this, like Hmong people is like the only culture that has these issues, right? But it's not like many cultures are patriarchal, and so it's not just Hmong culture, um, and I think that I think that it's something that we can't escape. Like it's a part of us, right? And just from seeing, like, reading writings by young women, like it seems like they a lot of times, like they want to do away with it or try to escape it. And then I think it's hard because so many cultures are patriarchal, right? Where men has more value, men are has more power, right? And so I mean, I think that it shouldn't be ignored. Like we need to address these issues, problems in our community, but I think that it's important to understand like why things are the way they are in our culture, right? And then maybe
Yeah.
Jack also help add some.
Yeah, can I just jump in really quick? So I'm so glad that you mentioned that about just the way that the kids are raised here. We are taught, I think, in school here in the U.S. to question everything, right? Question everyone, like, and I feel like that kind of goes against maybe more of the Hmong culture, where as children we are to respect our elders and not to question the things, but because of the different learning styles, we approach it from a different way. And I feel like that's where sometimes the block is that we might want to talk it out versus our parents, where they want us to, like you said, learn by seeing and learn by being there, and following through. And so I think sometimes we tend to take the Western views on things, and even go a little bit on a tangent here, but just in terms of how we view cultures, right? Even when sometimes we look back, and I'm guilty of this too, where I look back on the people in Laos and Thailand, Hmong people there, and I say, wow, that's crazy, but I have to remember that that culture is different from like the culture that is present in Laos and Thailand for Hmong people, which I consider myself a part of, is different from like the Hmong people here in the US. So I think as we're all kind of exploring this, just to keep in mind that what kind of biases and lens that we are coming into that conversation with. So, but go ahead, yeah, Paul.
Yeah, you're right. It's you have to look at the issue from different lenses, and for our kids here in America, the second generation, they are disconnected. It's connected with the Hmong culture because of the lack of education in that realm. And they also have been taught about, you're right, I mean, critical about pretty much everything that we do in life to make sure that it's fair and that it's legal and all that, those issues. I think one of the things that our young people have kind of have issues with was also the idea of patrilineal and patriarchal societies. We are a patrilineal society. American is a patriarchal, lineal society. Where when the child's born, it takes the last surname of the father, and so because of it's a patrilineal society, the men have rights to certain family traditions and things. Well, a lot of times our young people look at that and interpret that as being patriarchal means you don't do this, you don't wash your dishes, you don't have to let mom talk you into stupid things, and I think that did a huge disfavor for our young men. On the other hand, we also misinterpret that and thinking, okay, in a patriarchal society, you girls are submissive to the boys as well as your husband and the father-in-law and the family and everything else. And what our parents taught, your parents taught a lot of younger people, the second generation, is that that's the norm, that's the way, and don't question it. And then when you question it enough, they're going to say, oh, you're a bad girl, you're rebellious, I've disowned you, and all that stuff. And I think it kind of more or less make life the way we have learned to, we have seen. You have to remember, in a patriarchal society, it does not mean the man be the king, everybody serve him. In a patriarchal society that was functional for Hmong people for thousands of years, it was a complementary arrangement between the man and the woman. A couple of things that I think that we should think about is, as we mentioned earlier, the man did the heavy lifting, the hunting, the hard work, the hard physical manual labor work. The woman did the more tender work, tending to the kids, the cooking, all that lesser of a physical, strenuous work. So they complement each other well. Well, in this society, this country, well, cut off all those heavy work, because there's no wood to cut. There's no heavy log to carry on your shoulder. There's no need to protect against the robbers and the beasts that we face in the woods. So what does that diminish the man's work? Yes, it did diminish it drastically. Now all the cooking, the chores, who traditionally does all of those? The women do, right? And so now it's like, okay, I mean, I don't have too many jobs except for doing the lawn and fix the car. Now you women do all the work in the laundry and everything else. Well, what does that stand? What kind of message do we send to second generation people? Want the girls do all the work, and the guys just sit and watch TV and play video game and go fishing. And I think that kind of destroyed the second generation due to the fact that they didn't know how the patriarchal society functioned to make the family whole and survive the struggles. Well, I think now it's dawning on us that the boys are failing miserably in the second generation. Now we're coming to third generation coming up, and they're going to question this, and they're going to try to seek out the truth and how it works. And I think the third generation is going to fare better. They will probably be more likely to understand what's going on because they do take the time to discover it. My kids are, I look at them as third generation, and even though they're second generation, they're a little bit more understanding of the Hmong culture, but they don't turn their back on it. In a sense, I think they'll fare better because we, as a first generation, but we grow up in some ways, kind of survive this transition, and so we help them to survive. And so it's the second generation that got hit the hardest because they're disenfranchised from the Hmong life, but they also are not fully infused into or assimilated into mainstream society. So they're hanging in a balance, and I think that's kind of like the lost generation. But the issue is this second generation were actually the ones that need to bridge the old and the younger generation. And I think in most cases, they fail miserably, not because they are stupid, it's because of the way societies and the Hmong people have been, and because of circumstances and the time as well.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because I see myself as second generation almost, right? So like my parents came here as first generation to come here, but I wasn't born here. So it's kind of like I'm like second generation, almost like raised myself here. And so I feel like I have been one of those people that you mentioned earlier, where you ask lots of questions and then they're like, you need to not do that. You just need to like whatever your uncles tell you, you just do that, right? And I remember back when Callie and we did an episode on just ask us anything, and one of the questions was, if you could go back and tell yourself anything, what would you say? I don't remember if it was that episode or one of the other ones, and I told myself that I would go back and I would challenge those people anyway, but at a younger age. I think I didn't come to realize how important it was for me to understand, because asking these questions doesn't mean that I'm challenging them, but it was really me saying, help me understand your way of thinking. Because to me, those things didn't make sense. And I think the reason why we fail is because right? Like no, like this is the way it is, and that's it. Versus like trying to explain to you why things are the way that how things become the way that they are. At least that's been in my experience, Callie. I don't know about you. But I know that for me, it was always more of like, just listen and don't ask questions. And then when you do, they get really offended, and then they just want to like shitalo or bring you to a meeting to lecture you and stuff, like trying to explain to you why things are the way that they are.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I think because my dad valued education a lot. And I have 7 brothers. I'm the only girl. And so I would say the only thing that I had to do was like washing dishes. And then everything else, like I think my dad just treated me like a boy. And so that's kind of like my lens in terms of that. But I would say, my family was very traditional, still, shamanism. They live in North Carolina, which I consider like one of the more conservative, traditional Hmong communities, and so very, very strict traditional. And I mean, I would say growing up, I didn't question a lot of things. I liked it. I liked seeing my cousins. I liked doing stuff. Like I liked being with my girl cousins and just feeling like part of our little community and gathering all the time. And I think that's what I miss now. And I think when you had said, that the second generation really needs to bridge that gap, and I completely agree. I think that this third generation looks, and again, I'm going to make a blanket statement here. So anybody that wants to challenge me or have some thoughts on that, but I definitely feel like the third generation kind of looks on the Hmong culture as an outsider versus like an insider, right? Because I grew up talking Hmong, like my parents, my grandma lived with us, like we're fed Hmong food. There's no talking back about food, right? You ate what you ate. And I feel like the third generation is disconnected from that. And there's a big, definitely a big, like large amount of work that needs to be done in order to kind of retain the culture. Otherwise, it will be looked on even from our own Hmong people as from an outside perspective versus as an active participant in the community.
Yeah. And I also want to add too, like, I feel like the word like we're failing, but I also feel like we're trying really hard because like there's things like Hmong baby, for example, right? Like we are getting hit with it with the third generation where right? And so they are trying to like come up with like and really trying to incorporate like the American type of learning, right? Like making flashcards and books, and so then we can actually start teaching our kids Hmong again. I feel like we're trying, but not.
I mean, I think that in some of the culture, when you look at the third generation, like they don't speak it, right? But then at the same time, you look at how many Hmong people today are able to read and write Hmong, right? It's more than any time in our past history, because we only had a written language recently in the 1950s, right? And so I think that how I see that both things are kind of happening, where there are those that they're assimilating into America, right? And they don't speak Hmong anymore. They don't do a lot of the cultural practices. But at the same time, I see a lot of people who are preserving, who are able to read and write Hmong, right? Again, like we have people that are able to do that. And then even like having Hmong now being documented, the language, their books in Hmong, and you go on Google Translate, right? You can have Hmong language, and all these things we never had that before, right? We never had that, so I mean I kind of see it as both, where those who look for the identity and culture, they can find that. Where I think for our generation in the 80s, we couldn't find that. We came to America and we were lost in between, right? And then I think that I saw one of the question about um, example about how boys are failing, and then I think you look at education, higher education, where there's so few boys who are pursuing higher education, and there's so many more Hmong women who are doing really well, right? Graduating from college, being able to go beyond that, um, going to um, better jobs and having that better social economic status, right? And so I think that these are things that we really have to try to look at our community. Like, where are the boys, right? Like, why aren't they? What can we do to support them more, so that they also have opportunities to go to school and to get a job, or have better opportunities. And so, I mean, I don't really know all the answers, but I just see that I get asked that a lot, right? Like, where are the boys? Like, where are all the Hmong boys? Like, if they're not in school, what are they doing? And so, um, kind of know, but but yeah. So I mean, I think it is a question that a lot of people ask, like, so where are the Hmong boy and men? Where they're at, and things like that. So.
And saying you got a very good point there that what can we do to help support the boys, and I think as a society, as a community, as a people, um, we have done a disfavor to the boys because of what I've just talked about, because of the patriarchal society that we have learned to um, associate ourselves with, and then put a lot of restrictions, put a lot of um, boundaries for the girls. What that does is keep them on the right track to be successful. You could preach education all you want to the boys, but if you don't give them the structure and they're allowed to just do whatever they can, and even with that, it stems from girls need to be obedient, grow up to be, nyakopa, and the guys, you could screw up. And then when you could get ready to get married, and then your life begins. And I preach to my students all the time that no, your life don't begin when you got married. You don't screw up and pick up yourself and just be a man again. In this world, you start living when you are able to go to school. You need to take every opportunity and raise the guys to do the right things and to be in school and support them. Our parents, your parents, my parents could not support me in education the way that American parents supposed to support their kids. And so I think that's what failed a lot of the guys to begin with. The other thing that the guys and the girls, even look at all the guys that graduate from college. Here's the point. I know I should be saving this for later on, but I can't wait to get to it. All right. See, going back to what Seng said, you got so few boys in the higher education. I don't know where Seng is, where the boys and girls numbers are, but at the UCs in California, at the UC system, you have 4, 5, 6 times more girls than guys. If you look at UC Irvine, LA, you have 5, 6 girls to every boy that goes there. And I excuse my language, but a lot of times those guys are gay boys. And I don't say that to trigger anything, but that's just my observation. And what that means is you got so very, very few guys graduating from college ready to tackle the world and be compatible to their girls' counterparts and build this life, this great life. Well, there's for all the girls that graduate from college, there are very, very few Hmong guys that are able to, to be there for them, to be that partner in life. And so what happens is a lot of the girls do have to venture out of the race, or they have to settle for a mediocre Hmong guy. Now, for those Hmong guys, I graduate from college and are bachelors. Guess what? They grow up in the patriarchal system, and many of the guys that I know of, very, very good guys, bachelors, where did they look? Laos. And I can tell you, most of the guys who are career bound, have a great job, has a college degree, they are either have gone to Laos to seek out a wife that can be their, bride, or they contemplate about going. I had a nice chat with a group of guys that I'm referring to, and that's what I sensed.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean? Well, we need to look at ourselves and look at how we were raised and look at how we treat our kids and how this blaming on the patriarchal system to now looking at it and say, hey, what can we do to do better? And I think one of the things that I think that we all need to hear is the fact that it does not, um, in terms of how to build a more equitable community and how to, be fair for everybody. And it's something that we have to do. In social justice, it does not do anybody justice to point fingers. It has to take all the stakeholders to come together and say, hey, let's make things better for everybody. And I think the main point I want to point out is for the girls who are more likely to be successful in a lot of the endeavors that they've embarked on, to look at it and say, hey, I'm going to fight. This is my community. I'm going to fight to improve it instead of turning my back and then ditch it. Because guess what? You escape it, but when your kids grow up, they're going to ask you, Mom or Dad, what are Hmong? Hey, I'm Hmong. What am I? And then you're going to go back to the community and say, oh, this is the Hmong community. This is where you come from. Well, I don't know if it's going to be there if we don't fix it, if you don't do anything about it. And what the tricky thing is, you're going to say, okay, let's go to Laos or China to see it. No, we are not Hmong Lao. We're not Hmong Chinese. We're Hmong Americans. And that's Hmong Americans, our identity. You cannot. Okay, so if you are Italian, if you were German, you could go back to Germany and in Italy and discover your heritage, discover who you are. For Hmong people, no, you can't do that. You go to Thailand or Laos, no, you don't identify yourself because that's not where that's not who you really are. We have been here for 45 years. We're no longer Hmong Blanc. We are Hmong Americans, and I think that's something that we have to really think hard about.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to just point something out, and because I think so the way that I see you guys both looking at the lens of the comparison of Hmong men versus Hmong women in education, because I think you guys tend to see that there is a more like less boys in higher education, whereas I think I come from just seeing it like women are seeking higher education because we know the power in that, right? We know the power in what higher education can do for us. We know that in the American culture we can have similar opportunities if we go and reach for that, and that we are valued outside the Hmong culture. And I feel like because the boys already grow up with this privilege and feeling more value already, they are not they're not searching for that as much. And so just wanted to kind of put that comment in there. But I was going to close this up. Any last comments before I close it out?
Well, Olivia said, I do feel like our generation kind of failed, but we worked hard at it. And I see that you girls are working hard at it. I see a lot of young men out there working really diligently, working hard. I have been teaching my nephews and my sons and the traditions. And we have to take a different approach. We cannot take the old traditional way of teaching and passing on the traditions. At the same time, as Seng was saying earlier, we have seen a generation that is so enthusiastic about capturing this, the language, the culture, in especially the literacy. And we have to turn that around. It used to be that you experience it, you learn it from experience, doing repetition. Now we have to turn that around and say, hey, you know what? Let's take the other approach. Take literacy, use that as a tool to gain knowledge and use that. And I think that is probably the way to go. As I have been capturing a lot of our culture and traditions and everything into literacy, and I think a lot of people are doing that. The other thing is, there may be a lot of people who have assimilated, have climbed up the socioeconomic ladder, and they have moved on. But then there will be some hardcore people like Seng, people like you girls, people like a lot of the people that I've met in Minnesota, hardworking people, and some of the teachers in Fresno, that they are willing to do away with their career pursuit. They're willing to do away with the ability for self, advancement and promotion, and step down and just try to teach the kids. And a lot of the Hmong teachers in Fresno teaching Hmong language and culture were actually professors, which they could have done a lot better, but then they settled into high school just so that they could do that. And that really touches me. It really touches me. And I've been doing that, teaching for the last 15 years, teaching Hmong language and culture. And I see that a lot of my kids appreciate that. And when they go to college, they come back and say, Mr. Cha, I'm the only one that speaks and read and write Hmong, and I have to teach my other kids. And I think we all are doing our parts to the hardcore Hmong people that are trying to keep the culture alive. So I appreciate that. I just wanted you guys to know that you girls are doing the right thing to make sure that we retain the culture, or at least understand it for the next generation. And so, it really touched me. That's all.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for writing.
Yeah.
Like I certainly appreciate your book and the efforts that you've taken into doing that, and even your other book that's all in Hmong. Would love to see that translated. And I certainly am seeing a lot of good efforts, and I feel like it is an uphill battle though, because of the how much our second and third generation has assimilated, but how important that is, and just to really make sure we have those conversations with our family. That's the people closest to us that can really teach us, right? Especially since a lot of us are probably further away from family and kind of where the jobs are, and so not maybe like how we grew up, where we talk Hmong every day, and we get to see like all the cultures like happen in front of us. And so again, like I really enjoy this conversation. It was very much needed. I wanted to quickly just call out this comment and then say something about it. So we had somebody that said, I recall saying a word in Hmong incorrectly, and my dad called me stupid. He didn't take the time to teach me how the word should be. A lot of our parents did this. There's a large lack of communication and education from the older generation to the younger generation. And I definitely feel like, going back to Seng's point about how, people here learn different from how our parents learn, but that we also have to just keep going back and asking, right? Like we have to, we really need to, and I've done a little bit of work just like getting history from like the older people, because I feel like it is so important. And my Hmong is not the best, but I've tried to just really ask, even though it might make me look silly or might make me look stupid, or somebody might say those things to me. I feel like our generation really needs to make sure that we really try to bridge that gap and try to learn. And then like for the older people, not everybody is like you, yeah, Paul. Not everybody will take the time to write books and really take the time to teach us. And so I really appreciate what you've done. And just really encourage, if we are faced with people that aren't able to teach us or will make us feel stupid, that to seek people like you and to seek other people in the community that can help us. So, okay.
Seng, any last words from you, Seng?
Yeah.
I was just thinking, like, just like out of what you said, like, like, really, it's important really to communicate with our parents and try and talk to them, right? Because another part of it is learning to listen. And I think from just my own experience, like, I think that growing up here and speaking English and I just did, when they talked to me, I didn't know how to listen to them, and I didn't learn that till I was much older, right? And then I started to connect that, how they lecture me or how they say things is like how they show their care, right? And so I think that for a lot of youth, like they don't understand that yet, and you have to get to a certain point in your life where you learn to listen to your parents, elders, and I think that that's really a process that you have to kind of go through. But I think learning to listen is important. I would add for, especially for the youth, and looking at these issues with like patriarchy, things about our culture that you don't understand. Like also helps if you want to listen to it, right? You open your Hmong ear to listen to your parents and try to understand the culture. But I think it's so hard because popular culture, being in America, it's so easy to compete. It's so hard to compete with that when parents talk to our children. Even my own children, like talking to them is so difficult, right? And so, but again, you have to keep trying, right? You have to keep that conversation going so that they eventually they get to a point where they learn how to listen to. And I think for me, I that was a process for me to go through that, to finally learn to listen, to open my own ears and hear what my parents are trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember, Kali, you were referencing the book that you're reading, and it's called An Introduction to Hmong Culture. It's been written. It's been um, a whole 10 years since I published it. It's out. It's in libraries, most of the major libraries. It's also on sale online. Hmong ABC does carry it too, so I do have a few copies, at hand just in case anybody's interested in getting a hold of it. So I appreciate you, your good words about my book. It's humbling to be mentioned by you girls too.
Yeah, absolutely. I got mine off Amazon, so if anybody wants a copy, you can get it off Amazon, and it's a fairly easy read, I would say. And then you go into like the Hmong history, but you also talk about the marriage funerals and amongst other chapters. And so I think it for anybody that's really seeking to learn more about the Hmong culture and to truly understand it, definitely pick it up. I think it's going to be a great addition.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much to you two for getting on with us and answering our questions. And I think the point of our show is to really sit down and have these type of open conversations and to hash things out. And so here at All That Talk, we believe that conversation means drive change, and change starts with you. And so we hope that you all will go and find other people that you can have these conversations with and create some movements in your community. So
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
See ya.